following is a local resident producers program. The program content is the sole responsibility of the producer and does not necessarily reflect the views or policies of CATV2, Oshkosh Community Media Services, the City of Oshkosh, or Time Warner Cable.
Hi everyone, welcome to another edition of Eye on Oshkosh. Cheryl Hentz here, and very pleased to be joined tonight by Gordon Hintz. He's our state representative from the 54th Assembly District. Gordon has, we've tried to get him here a few times in the past, and between our schedule and his schedule it just didn't work out. But he is here tonight, and we're very pleased about that. So thanks, we appreciate your being here.
Happy to be here and glad to have you back.
We got lots of things that we want to talk about. The very first thing that I want to mention though is, and it certainly isn't at the top of anyone's priority list, but it's just something that has been brought to my attention by 3 different people, besides myself, in the last couple of weeks. And it's something that the Motor Vehicle Department is doing, and they're overseen by the DOT, correct? Okay. So, myself included now, we've gotten brand new plates sent to us, and the numbers have changed and everything. And their excuse is, well, the sesquicentennial plates or just any plates, they wear out after a while, so here are new plates. And the funny thing about this, Gordon, is none of us had plates that were even the slightest bit worn. We had to pay nothing for these new plates, and which I'm grateful for.
You didn't request them?
No. They just automatically sent us letters, and out they came. The registration, well, in my case, I was up for renewal, okay?
Right.
So mine came, but the other people's, they didn't have renewals coming at all. They just got letters saying, we're sending you new plates. And they're like, what? Why? You know, to me, that just seems like a tremendous waste of taxpayer dollars. I mean, on the one hand, I know, I think it's illegal to drive around with plates that can't be read. And I see a fair number of those. So why can't we just have the police, as they're driving around town, just pull people over in a friendly way, give them a little warning ticket that says, you know, you gotta, in X number of days, send in for new plates to the DOT or DMV and show proof that you've done that. That to me would be a more practical way of getting new plates to people whose plates are faded.
Yeah, I mean, I can't tell you, I mean, in fact, I don't even know when the last time I replaced my plates are. I moved them from one car, you know, to another when I registered a new vehicle. I'm going to have to get back to you on that. Maybe next time I come on and get an answer. We did have a meeting with the Northeastern Wisconsin Department of Transportation recently, and that included the Division of Motor Vehicles. And I don't know if you've gotten your license renewed. It's actually much better than cell phone service or some of the other places that seem to have reached the top in terms of annoyance or time wasted.
You mean
somewhere.
the actual driver's license?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought it was a big time waster.
Was it?
Well, because I sat there, I think for 3 or 4 hours.
When you went to get your license renewed? Boy,
yeah.
because we've really...
and there was an elderly woman sitting next to me, and she had been there since early in the morning.
Recently?
Yeah.
Well, I think that was under 7 minutes.
Yeah. It was, maybe it's the time of day that you went.
Perhaps.
I mean, I thought if I got there right after lunch that it would be fine. and no such luck. And she had, because, you know, you're all sitting around, you're watching the numbers on the digital thing flash by to see when you're up next, and there doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason to that either. But, you know, she and I got to talking, and she said, I thought if I came first thing in the morning, but she said, nope. And this poor woman, you know, she actually had to leave and get her husband his medication and stuff, and then come back. So I felt really sad for her.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, you know, most of the experiences we've had, and they've actually really worked at, you know, streamlining things out there. And my experience backed that up. But obviously, yeah, it's probably going to depend on ebb and flows. On license replacement, I think, you know, that's something that the department, you know, does, and it's probably automated in some way. But I wonder, you know, what the policy is on how many years you have to go by. I mean, I don't think we've changed our plate since the 90s, right? I mean, for the most part. They had a contest.
Yeah, I think so.
You know, I still have my parents' old yellow plate somewhere. And but.
Well, you know, I mean, I was actually going to try and remember to bring my plates in tonight to show you, hey, look, not a thing wrong with either one of them. You know,
be a good government waste example. Well, you know, a couple of years ago they had a debate about whether we should get rid of the front license plate. In other words, you know, you only have a back license plate, and I think Governor Doyle had proposed it. And of course, it was more of a political thing. I mean, it would save not a ton of money, but it was an example of something that was redundant and that wasn't needed. You know, I think law enforcement, you know, a lot of times are checking for the sticker to make sure that you're, you know, valid.
Right.
And I'm sure, you know, if they can't read your plate and can't run it through the system, that'd be another reason for them to have cause to pull you over. But I'll have to get back to that. And yeah, it doesn't seem to make sense. And again, you know, I thought you were going to tell me that the double whammy was you got a license plate and then you had to also pay for it.
No, that I would have been screaming about.
Okay, yeah, because they're looking for money to pay for roads, and my guess is that some of the things are, you know, I thought, uh-oh, she's going to tell me that they're going to send people license plates and then charge them a couple $100 to help pay for highway.
Yeah, well, that you would have heard about from me long before this.
Probably from a lot of people.
I'm sure. But, yeah, I just thought, well, you know, it just seems like the police should be pulling people over if they can't read the plates and handle it that way, not just sending out plates kind of in an indiscriminate sort of way.
Hey, well, this is how I find out about things. Yeah. So not always on TV, but people bring things to my attention, and then I ask questions and get answers. So.
Well, good. Well, that, like I said, it's not at the top of a lot of priority lists, but it just was in the forefront of my mind. Let's talk about the state voucher system, because that's kind of a mess, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, you know, education is one of the biggest things that we do in the state of Wisconsin. Republicans and Democrats helped build what we've had in the state in terms of public education. And, you know, even with some flaws, we largely were viewed as a state with high-quality education that invested in their schools. And in terms of our government investment, it was a large part of the state budget. It's really been transformed over the last 4 years, and the big change has been the statewide expansion of taxpayer funding for private schools. And this is sort of the signature educational reform initiative. And, you know, vouchers originally in Milwaukee were supposed to be a lifeline for poor public school kids that were stuck in a bad school to have the opportunity to go to a private school. And what we've seen in Wisconsin is that 80% of the people that are enrolling in private schools that meet the income threshold were already attending those schools. So the signature educational initiative is simply taking public tax dollars and shifting them to pay for tuition for people that were already paying for school in the first place. Yeah. And that you know, that 70-80% numbers statewide, you know, reflects here locally as well. In the meantime, we had the biggest cuts in public education in state history in 2011, and while there was a minor increase in this budget to restore those cuts, you know, it was nowhere near the gap. So here we are, we're having you know, local school districts having to make difficult decisions, class size getting up there again, and really, you know, culturally trying to adapt to the post-Act 10 world, where in Oshkosh, you know, we've got teachers jumping to districts that pay more, and at the same time, we're supporting a completely separate school system, and someone's going to have to explain to me, you know, who's benefiting. I mean, the governor said it's a technical mistake that public school students were supposed to get preference, but but that's not what we've seen. And I think this one is, there's some sticker shock, I think, to the public, because the idea of vouchers outside of Milwaukee was pretty new to begin with, and there hasn't been a lot of demand. Meaning, existing public school students are choosing to stay in public schools, and so this taxpayer funding is just going to pay for existing private students. And not only is it costing in the hundreds of millions of dollars, but it's what improvement can there be if you're just simply switching funding from one system to another? And this is a radical departure from what we've done in Wisconsin.
Well, because it is so screwed up, you'd like to kind of tweak it or just do away with it altogether in some ways. But is it kind of late now to unring the bell? I mean, how would you go about doing that?
Well, I've obviously, the first thing we tried to do in 2009 budget was require testing and accountability for the schools receiving taxpayer funding in the Milwaukee area, and that started in 2009, and that's kind of what we've tried to do now. Meaning, okay, well, if we are going to do this, can we make sure that there's some accountability? And we've all heard the horror stories of funding that has gone to schools that have closed shop and moved to Florida, like the Milwaukee school happened in December, and the students then get sent back to public school and the dollars are already spent. But look, the majority of our private schools that are in the program, especially locally here, are good schools, but it has to be, what is our priority going to be, and how are we going to meet our constitutional requirement to provide an equal opportunity education to all people? And, I just think it's, can you put it back in the bag? I think so, if we're going to have a real, discussion about it. But to be honest with you, given the makeup of the legislature and the talk out there, there's talk about lifting caps around the state and just making it a free-for-all. And you would be supporting two education systems, and you would largely, some want to lift the income caps and make it pure parental choice. But what we've seen in the Milwaukee experience and in some of the other communities is that you can choose to go to a choice, private school, but they don't have to take you. Public education is required to educate everybody, regardless. It's one of the things we do in this country that other countries don't.
Right.
We have some students that have acute cognitive and physical disabilities, where the costs for educating that student, we have one student in the district, some administrator said, was $106,000 just to educate that one student. Well, I can tell you, no private school is going to take that student.
Yeah.
And the dollars don't really flow to cover that actual cost. And that's what we've seen, is the more difficult students left behind in the Milwaukee public schools, and a smaller number of at-risk special needs students going to the taxpayer-funded private schools in the Milwaukee area. And so I just think it's sort of a dangerous time to be talking about, expansion, given how important public education is. And look, status quo is never good enough, and I think there are some innovative ideas that that need to occur. But someone's going to have to explain how, switching taxpayer funding from public schools to existing private school students is going to improve anything. And here we are, 4 years in, and if you talk to districts around the state, they're still recovering from Act 10. One of the things that kept Oshkosh teachers in our district was their bargaining rights. Yeah. We were a low-spending, high-performing district, and teachers stayed here because they were, invested. Yeah. Now, North Fond du Lac and Neenah are offering $10,000 more for teachers, so we get the young teachers. They do 1, 2, 3 years. We train them, we certify them, we invest in them, and then they go out in the open market and they leave.
Yeah.
And so we've got enough challenges for public schools out there without taking on an entirely separate system by shifting dollars to private schools. And we really need to ask ourselves, where's public education going in 2014?
Yeah, let me just ask a question about Act 10. Certainly I too know of some people who have left the district and gone on to another district, but I don't understand why necessarily, because Act 10 affected everybody across the state. It wasn't just Oshkosh. Do you know why that is? I mean, are the other districts just ponying up more money and better benefits on their own?
Similar to discussions over revenue limits, where you came into things in the 90s. There were certain districts that had more revenue or might have growing enrollment or who benefited from the funding formula more that, or made decisions, with local levies that, where they were in 2011, 2013, when Act 10 came into play, had more money in the pot, already had compensation models more. I mean, our teachers here were paid less than other districts.
Yeah.
But they, stayed because they enjoyed working in the district and because, they had investments in the system through their bargaining rights, through their unions. So, I mean, taxpayers in Oshkosh actually benefited from collective bargaining. So those districts were already, now when you just say apples to apples, where, a 10-year teacher is the same as a first-year teacher with, no rights or seniority or anything else, well, they're going to go fly the coop, and that's one of the challenges that we have, and we're probably going to have to look at, compensation models, but, the reality is we're also seeing less loyalty. I mean, we're getting, districts are getting emails in mid-August from science teachers saying, you know what, I got a job somewhere else. Well, school starts in 2 weeks,
Yeah.
and it's hard enough for a lot of districts, especially in rural areas, to find, physics or biology teachers or math teachers. And, the first thing I talked to the superintendent from Kaukauna the other day, and I said, are you a poacher district or are you a donor district? And they said, actually, we're a poacher district and we've done very well. And they've been picking off, teachers from other districts because, they've been able to, they were at a point where they had more revenue and were able to do that. Because, I mean, every district is restrained by the existing revenue caps unless they go to an operating referendum. That has been discussed here beyond the technology one that was just passed. But, this is one of those complicated, unintended consequences. I mean, people thought, it's going to be great. The market's going to open up.
Yeah.
But, you're better if you have a principal or you have a superintendent and you're trying to work on initiatives district-wide or school-wide. They don't take 1 or 2 years. You're trying to do these things over time. And, some of the best teachers, are ones that are part of a program or initiative or work on things over time. And, I mean, when I think about when I went to Webster Stanley Middle School, I mean, I had Mr. Gasser and Mr. Beester and Mr. Bauer and all these teachers that had been there for 20 years.
Yeah.
They were legends.
Yeah.
And I had them at the end of their community, and those are things that are going to be lost. And regardless of where you stand on Act 10, I think it is something that needs to be addressed because if we're having the problem in Oshkosh, it's the rural districts are really the ones who've spoken out and said, they have a hard enough time recruiting teachers to come teach in rural areas to begin with. But with the poaching going on, you're one of 2 districts, it's become increasingly difficult. And like I said, districts to invest in a new teacher and help them get their certification and credentials only to see them leave, the training costs after a while eat away at things.
Sure.
So, I mean, these are real issues that, I think it's time to revisit what some of the downside to Act 10 has been, and it's got to get on the radar, and hopefully it'll be an issue raised this fall.
Do you think that the Republicans will ever admit that there have been downsides to Act 10? I mean, Gordon, we've already started seeing the ads on TV from Americans for Prosperity talking about how, we've kept more money in the classrooms, and this was they never make reference specifically to Act 10. They just say these rather vague sort of references. It was the right thing to do. It was the right thing to do. And, Governor Walker balanced the budget. I am so sick of that lie. Yeah, he balanced the budget, but so did every other governor. It's in our Constitution that the budget has to be balanced. So it's not like Scott Walker did anything great.
No, I mean, there's incredible, I mean, politically, I can tell you, I mean, they wouldn't be the first group of politicians to not admit any fault.
Right.
But usually they say, don't spend your time. But there is a lack of accountability there, and we're going to govern in the world that we live in today. So I'm not here to say, oh, we need to go back to 2009, but and the reality was healthcare costs had gone up enough that it was right to get an additional commitment to pay for those things. And look, when we were in the recession in 2009, we did a furlough for state employees, which was effectively a way to try to save money. It's just that there are consequences and there are things that are impacting the future of public education now that need to be revisited. I mean, whether it's through the school funding formula or whether it's giving some flexibility for districts to be able to meet those. I mean, there's got to be an acknowledgement that that it's not working. And there was a rural schools task force that the Assembly had put together, the Speaker put together, made up of Republicans and Democrats. They had a lot of hearings around the state. The recommendations were sort of disagreed upon. And again, the voucher issue is another one that goes up there. I mean, here you and I are having a complicated discussion about how to recruit and retain quality educators, and that's without even discussing the fact that we're shifting money away from public schools and into existing private schools without benefiting any of the public school students. And so, these are issues that need to be dealt with. And we're also still suffering morale issues. I mean, if you talk to superintendents, they'll say, we have 60% of our teachers are new since Act 10. And 40% are sort of walking around with the scars of, being disrespected and just kind of, it's changed. The climate's changed, and the attitude around education has changed from one of, this was a field that I wanted to be in to people starting to look elsewhere. And so, and those things are real. People understand the financial part of things, I think, that needed to be done from a budget standpoint. But, some of the things that people are saying, oh, we balanced the budget or we made government more efficient, it's not what we're seeing on the ground. I encourage everybody to, visit their public schools and get an idea of, what the real challenges that we face and the cost of not doing anything.
Yeah. Have we, you talk about trying to find money to do the things that the schools need to do. One thing that's hurting school districts is some of the homeschooling. You talk to parents, and I think more and more are getting frustrated with their schools, whether it be a lack of money to do certain things or the fact that they're having to come up with more money for their kids to do things or whatever. But do you have any statistics on numbers of people who have pulled their kids out and have gone the homeschooling route? Because that does ultimately affect the school district. Yeah, those folks still have to pay school taxes, but school districts get a certain amount of money for every child enrolled in their school. And if they don't have as many people enrolled, they're not going to get as much money.
Right. I think there are some homeschool statistics out there. I know at the local level, with open enrollment in this state, it's one of the things that we hear, and our local board has really tried to say, let's enhance the quality and value in our district so we become a destination district instead of students that live here leaving to go to a different district and the dollars following. Let's make this be a destination district. And we've seen that in some areas, and even that gets a little complicated because then, maybe you can say, well, that's healthy competition. But it depends who ultimately, you have to educate who's there regardless. And we know, the correlation between poverty and educational challenges in the classroom. We've talked about special needs earlier and some of the costs associated with that, where the funding certainly has not kept up. All of these things, we want to, reassure people that we have quality public schools available, and the resources need to be there if we're going to deal with, the real challenges that exist. And, and that's why, again, what we're doing seems to be so out of line with what the challenges are. And I think our district is trying to prioritize, and sort of triage on, well, how can we, maintain our educators? How can we, get rid of the perception that this is a district that where educators are leaving, or make this a place where people want to raise their kids and have strong neighborhoods. And the statewide discussion fits very much into what's happening in Oshkosh.
Well, and you talk about what's happening in Oshkosh. I was just talking with someone yesterday in a professional capacity, and I'm not going to say who or what, but he's been around this town for a very, very long time. And he said, you know, you can't find people to come here, whether it's a doctor, a dentist, a lawyer, a teacher, or an administrative professional in the school districts. Yes, you can find some who will come, but you can't find enough to fill the demand. And why, he said, in his opinion, it's because this is a lousy community. You know, it's difficult to convince someone when our streets look the way they do, and so on and so forth. It's hard to convince someone to come here.
I mean, to me, some people are always going to be grumpy. Look, I'd rather live here, you know, than Appleton, than Fond du Lac. I think there's a lot more character here. I love the people here. Sometimes we get that challenge where I know the university or Aurora or someone is recruiting, you know, a physician or a new faculty member, you know, perhaps from out of state. And the challenge is, well, we'd love them to live here, you know, and schools are going to be a big part. The challenge I know that exists is for some of them that bring their spouses is finding their spouse a job. And a lot of times they may end up living in Neenah or Appleton just to expand their access to other job markets where, you know, if someone's going to be working in Oshkosh, the spouse could work in Oshkosh, Neenah, Appleton, even Green Bay, and have a, you know, bigger opportunity. So that's one challenge. But boy, I mean, you know, taxes are pretty low, you know, versus other communities. Houses are relatively affordable. We've got great parks. We've got a lake. I mean, we're the event city. I think there's a lot going on. You know, I think our quality of life is high. But, you know, look, we still have the perception among some. I mean, I think Oak Lawn getting done was so big because as long as you had a bucket on a shopping cart catching rain, you know, that was the perception of Oshkosh schools. And it was always worse than the reality. And I'll be honest with you, the streets, and you know, I live over on the east side. I mean, Otter and CP, got to get them done. Parkway. But the reality is we have made progress on a lot of our streets. And of course, a lot of the focus locally has had to go on flood mitigation. But I don't know. I mean, I still think our best days can be ahead of us. But we're going to have that challenge. And we're going to need to, you know, have a broader economic discussion about what kind of jobs we're going to fit in here. I mean, I know we're all going through a tough period here, especially with the upcoming layoffs at Oshcorp, about, you know, well, what kind of jobs are we going to have, you know, and can we maintain high-end manufacturing, or, you know, how are we going to supplant those things? And, you know, we're gonna have to be competitive, but boy, I mean, there's certainly a lot to like about Oshkosh right now.
There is, and you know, it hurts me when I hear things like that because I'm a native of here, like you, but you are a native, right? Yeah, that's what I thought. But you know, by the same token, I mean, he has a point. The streets look terrible. The schools have their issues, and but he also blamed the prison in it coming here. And you know, I've heard that from other folks too. And again, what are you going to do? You can't just up and move it now. It's here. Some people blame the university. And again, that has brought a lot of jobs, has brought a lot of income. What are you going to do? You can't move that all away now. We'd go back to the 40s or 50s, you know, in the way the city looks. So you have to find a balancing act. You have to find a way, I think, and I don't have the answer to that, but you have to find a way to work with what you have and sort of turn lemons into lemonade. Yeah,
and this is, I mean, a lot of the most, it seems the further away you are from Washington, D.C., the more innovation is occurring, meaning, you know, cities and mayors and city managers are sort of driving a lot of the new ideas, both on economic development, but also other policy. Some of it's probably the gridlock at the political level, but some of it also is the desperation that, boy, you know, we're going to have to compete with other communities our size, and we're going to need to diversify our economy. We can't just be, you know, reliant on military contracts or the public sector, and you know, a lot of that again has to be in new business development. You know, that's where the majority of new jobs come from, and you know, that's going to be a state, local, regional, kind of economic, partnership. But I think we have a lot of assets that a lot of places don't. Having the third largest university in the state, and I think, Rick Wells, who's on his way out, deserves a lot of credit for really making the university system more of a robust model, especially in Northeast Wisconsin, has kind of set the table for some pretty innovative ideas to use the research capacity at the university to do some pretty innovative startups. And so hopefully the next chancellor can kind of take that kind of idea of what higher education can be and run with it.
They've got some big shoes to fill.
Yeah, no, I mean it's an interesting time. I mean, my entire time in the legislature has been overlapped with his tenure. And few people were more effective down in Madison. We worked together a lot. I'm on the building commission, and certainly did a lot of build up here on campus through that. And no, it is, and he's been a real leader in the community. I mean, I know we've had a lot of discussion about towns and gowns and Oshkosh, and but I don't think there's ever been a better physical connection, with the campus, but also, between the community and campus, just from getting people on there. I mean, Chancellor Wells, towards his retirement ceremony, I think mentioned that when he first got to campus, there was somebody a couple blocks away who indicated, "Oh, I've never actually been inside a building on campus." And so when they do their fish fry on the Fox during homecoming week or during the welcome back in the summer, it's really been he saw it as a real opportunity, and hopefully the new person will see that as something that needs to be done as well.
Sure. You mentioned healthcare about 10 minutes or so ago, and so that kind of leads me into the next thing on the list here, and I'm sure it's on your list of things to talk about, and that's the healthcare exchanges and Medicaid and what have you. We are a couple of months now into Obamacare sort of being in full swing, and it still kind of chaps my cheeks a little bit that Walker sent the money back that Washington sent to us to set up a healthcare exchange, and then had to find money to still go ahead and do it.
I mean, this of all the, there's been some big decisions and big disagreements, this past legislative session, but this may been the worst decision, both from an economic standpoint, a budget standpoint, and a policy standpoint. Again, wherever you stand on the Affordable Care Act, it was supposed to work with states, and it was supposed to work with the federal funding to ramp up existing Medicaid, and it's called Badger Care in Wisconsin, to be able to cover the poorest population, and that was going to be the cost-effective way to do so. The hospitals all wanted it. The doctors all wanted it. The economists said, 10,000 jobs are at stake. We would get $2.4 billion over the next few years. And instead, we said no. And
He said no.
He said no. And as a result, we're going to pay $119 million more in Wisconsin taxpayer dollars to cover up to 85,000 fewer people. It didn't pass any of the smell tests.
Right.
I mean, it was bad budget-wise, it was bad economically, and it was bad for healthcare access. And so that may be the worst distortion of the truth, because they lowered the eligibility threshold and said, well, we're going to cover people 100% or below the poverty line, including the childless adults on the wait list, and that's great. But we could have covered them and parents with children just above that. Instead, those people got kicked off. We have no idea where they are in the system and whether they've been able to find even a high deductible plan in the private market. And there are enough growing pains out there with the exchanges in all states, but we didn't help ourselves out at all. And it really makes you question, well, what's your job is to govern. I mean, there were Republican governors who did their own exchanges. There were Republican governors who took the money. Even states like Iowa sort of did a hybrid where they kind of did something along the lines of what Governor Walker tried to do, but they used federal money in a more cost-effective way to try to do it. My guess is at some point all 50 states will take the federal money to accomplish this, sort of like not every state took Medicaid in the 60s to begin with when it was first created, but then eventually they all did. But we're going to have to get past this
Yeah.
I want to run for president era, I guess.
Do you know offhand, were there any other states that actually did what our governor did and send back the money?
Yeah, and again, it was sort of the, due to the kind of fervent Tea Party opposition to the, Federal Affordable Care Act, it was seen as, well, we just will reject it altogether, as if, instead of saying, well, look, it's the law of the land. What's the best way for me to govern my state if I want to increase access, if I want to, have the best budget possible, if I want to have 10,000 more jobs? That wasn't the decision that was made. A lot of them, I think, were playing politics, trying to appeal to a base that wanted to reject anything coming out of Washington, even if it didn't make sense on paper. And yeah, there were several states, where that was the case, but no state kicked more people off of their existing program than Wisconsin. I mean, we have, in Governor Walker, when he was in the legislature, was one of the people that helped under Governor Thompson create Badger Care. And again, it wasn't for, it was for the working poor. I mean, they acknowledge that we're always going to have people at the bottom who are going to have a difficult time having affordable health care. And it doesn't mean they're not working. It just means that they're not making enough to be able to afford their own policy. And that's going to be an important benefit to our workforce and to our population. Something's changed since then where, there seems to be sort of a general disdain for, the working poor. And, decisions don't seem to be made with the best calculations in mind. Yeah.
Well, I would hasten to remind some folks that even Senator Ron Johnson's, some of his employees are in Badger Care, so, or at least they were a few years ago. I don't know if they've gotten bumped off with Obamacare coming into play.
I mean, a lot of our large employers, that's the case. Yeah.
So anyway, okay, I want to talk a little bit about, while we're on the subject of Governor Walker, he seems to be doing a lot of things that just don't make a whole lot of sense, and we've already covered a few of those. Yeah. Now he's, he's talking, still, his administration is still looking at how they can possibly undo domestic partnerships, and yet at the same time, they're acknowledging that they may be on the wrong side of the law when it comes to banning same-sex marriage, in light of how many other states have already had their bans overturned. Does he know? Does his right hand know what his left hand is doing, or what one side of his mouth is saying? Does he have any clue? And this really, people don't give a damn, Gordon. They don't care.
No, I mean, this is one of those issues. I mean, I think part of the challenge, for a lot of politicians is just the increased level of ideological purity, that exists, where, in his case, you can't run for president as a Republican unless you're, opposed to immigration, against, access to reproductive health, against, socially conservative, all these things. And so, that while they haven't repealed, at least, legislatively, the domestic partner, benefit law that was the best attempt that we could do in our time in the majority to, get as far as we could, given our constitutional amendment. They still take a general position that, it's not the way we want to go. I mean, what's incredible in our state is how in 2006 we passed this constitutional amendment, and in the 8 years since, there's just been this massive sea change of both public opinion, courts' decisions, other states. I mean, the fact that every one of our neighboring states, Illinois, Iowa, Minnesota, all have marriage equality, and Wisconsin has this strict constitutional amendment that at the time we were, when it was on the ballot, people said, don't, the people opposed to it, don't do this. It's going to be hard to undo. And as we look to recruit, think about what we just said about Oshkosh. When we look to recruit talent, when we look to make young people who are largely in support of marriage equality, we want people to come to this state to work and live. When every one of our neighboring states has something that we don't, it's just a massive, mistake and error on our part. And I know the Attorney General is kind of doing everything he can to anticipating that, the federal court might strike down our constitutional amendment as unconstitutional, it'll be a real question. There seemed to be some pivoting, I think, among the governor about how strongly he wants to have that fight, given then again, I always say this to young people that, views change.
Yeah.
I say this to young voters all the time. Sometime you'll be the majority. It's true, older voters, they're the highest group likely to vote, but someday you'll be the older voters, and so, Republicans, Democrats under 30, all support marriage equality largely, are all a little more libertarian and open-minded when it comes to, things like even, legalization of marijuana and some other things. And so, and those are other topics, but you're seeing the changing opinions happening, quicker on some of these things than people expected. I think one of the things in Wisconsin, some people on common refrain is, well, I don't care, people can do what they want. But the reality is, gay couples in Wisconsin don't have the same rights. It requires more than indifference. It requires an actual will to say, you know what, that's not right, that that kid's parents don't have the same rights as another kid's parents in this state. And so the court still may be the best way, and I'm hopeful, but it deserves more attention from everybody out there.
Well, and what a lot of viewers, or anyone out there for that matter, might not be aware of, is in 1982, Wisconsin became the first state in the Union to ban, discrimination against gay people when it comes to housing, employment, insurance coverage, that kind of thing. So we were the leaders back in 1982. And here, some 30 years later, we are just so archaic and pedestrian in our views.
It feels like it was, longer than 8 years ago, because it wasn't that long ago. In subsequent elections, like in Minnesota and other places, you've seen that it's been able to be defeated. I feel like it was passed sort of at the last possible time, that it could, and I think there was some misunderstanding out there. But I think people have gotten more comfortable with it, and my hope is that the courts will apply the same standard that's happened in other states to Wisconsin, and we can get the government out of the marriage business.
Well, hopefully so, because it's a little bit more depressing too when you see places in the Bible Belt in the deep South, like Alabama, places like, or Arkansas rather, places like that, legalizing it. It's kind of ridiculous. You were talking about women's health care and abortion and forced ultrasound bill. Let's talk about that for a little bit.
Yeah, it's been a bad session, and sometimes when there's so much focus on the economy, or at least rhetoric on the economy, people are, some issues kind of fall to the side. But, look, women's reproductive health became a real, hot button for the Republicans in the legislature and the governor with some pretty draconian measures. We know people have strong feelings on the issue of abortion and access to birth control. Over the years, while they haven't repealed, the right to abortion at the federal level, the states have really been cracking down and making it as restrictive as possible for something that, again, is a very personal, private, medical decision. The idea that predominantly a group of white males is going to mandate a medical procedure that doctors oppose as part of someone's, pre-screening, for their elective decision is crazy, and it's offensive, and it's a violation, I think, of people's, we had the governor of Pennsylvania when they had a similar bill said, well, they can just close their eyes, they don't have to look at the screen. I don't think the public out there thinks that we should have a governor and a group of legislators mandating, a transvaginal ultrasound, for patients in this case when it's opposed. Do we do that for any other medical procedures out there?
For someone who doesn't understand what it is, Gordon, tell them what this forced ultrasound bill is.
Yeah, well, as I understand it, and I'm not going to have all my, be an expert on it, but when you go into, for your decision for an elective legal procedure that exists, before you can go through with the abortion process, you need to get a, view an ultrasound of, the fetus inside you. Again, which is something in a lot of cases, an incredibly personal, tough decision. I mean, women that I've talked to that even for medical reasons had to get an abortion, telling me what it's like when they're walking and they're getting harassed by protesters for something that is probably one of the worst moments of their life. Again, the idea that government would get between a doctor and a patient is something that's truly offensive. The other part of things is the restriction on admitting privileges, where it's become so difficult to get doctors that, again, can provide a legal service in a lot of communities. They said that any doctor that is performing abortion services need to have admitting privileges at a local hospital in the area, which makes it difficult in a lot of the parts of the state where there isn't a physician, who will perform such things. And so, look, I understand the issue is sensitive and people have strong views on that and strong personal views. I guess, I come from a standpoint of I don't want to impose my views on somebody else's personal decision, and I don't think government should either. I think it should be safe, legal, and rare. And I think the best thing that we can do is promote access to contraception and prevent the unwanted pregnancies that lead to unnecessary abortion. But these are two things that, shouldn't just offend women in the state. They should offend everybody, because, when the medical establishment is saying, this is, don't get in our decisions. Don't mandate the service as a doctor I have to do. Don't restrict our access to serve people as a way to get, in countries that have no access, no legal abortion, abortion still occurs. It just occurs in alleys. It occurs in dark places.
Back rooms?
Yeah. And,
with hangers
so
and
if we're going to have an honest discussion about it, that's what needs to be discussed.
And, okay, so we all know that that abortion is still legal in the state of Wisconsin. So they're mandating this ultrasound, and for what purpose? I haven't quite been able to wrap my head around this. So they get an ultrasonic view of the fetus. Then what? What's the point?
I think there's always different bills. Sometimes they, I know we've had bills in the past. I don't think that became law that required the doctor to ask the patient if they've been pressured by their parents or anybody else. And then they have to make a subjective determination of whether, that's the case or not.
Well, sure, but Gordon, that's asking a few questions.
No, but I'm saying it was another
driving up healthcare costs.
Yeah, well, but I'm saying it's an intervention trying to get between a doctor and their patient on an issue, in hopes that, when I argue with my colleagues personally, they say always, never question their sincerity on issues, meaning they're serious about this. And, I think they feel like, well, we can deter someone, by having this screening. And maybe on the surface someone says, well, that doesn't make sense. That makes sense. Again, you're mandating a pretty invasive procedure that is medically unnecessary, that's not a part of what the medical best practices are. I think that's highly questionable. Again, these should be medical decisions like this should be personal and private and left up to a patient and their doctor.
And what if someone does not either, prescribe or order this ultrasound, or the patient says, no, I'm not going to do it? Obviously, then they're not going to get an abortion. But what if a doctor just doesn't order it?
I think they'd be breaking the law. I'm not a lawyer or a doctor in this case, but I certainly question the reality and the impact on just how offensive and invasive. Again, ask yourself: are there other, what other medical decisions does the legislature mandate? When we say, boy, they're going to have a biopsy for this. Well, we better make sure. We don't do that.
No.
For good reason.
Jobs. Governor Walker, when he ran, his campaign promise was he was going to create 250,000 new jobs. Has he even created half of those?
No, and I'm going to take a slightly different angle. The rhetoric has failed massively. And I'm someone who believes that, states have a role to play, but, international factors, when there's an earthquake in Japan, that impacts our economy more than probably state policy. I mean, the biggest things that we can do are investments in our education system, and our technical college system, and our university system, to try to incentivize, new capital. But the things that the governor talks about rhetorically have had little to no impact. I mean, the reality is we went from being 11th in job creation in Governor Doyle's final year to 35th in the country. We've actually gone backwards, and we're behind nearly every one of our neighboring states. And so the governor can beat his chest all he wants, but the reality is, and maybe it's not all his fault, but don't tell me it's working when it's not working. I mean, there are a lot of reasons. We have an aging population. We've got, we have a concentration of manufacturing at a time when, we're seeing not huge growth in manufacturing. We're seeing some challenges out there that are very real, but every minute that we distract away from those challenges by pretending, oh, this ranking says this, or, phony indicators that don't, reflect the reality of the ground, I think the public wants someone that's going to be honest and that's going to be accountable. And the reality is that we've had neither. The biggest thing the government can do, I mean, this is the interesting one. Again, you could have done Act 10 a number of different ways. We had to balance the budget. We had to right-size things, if that's the argument. But in Winnebago County alone, we have more than 11,000, I think, public employees in Winnebago County. Yep. It was more than a $30 million annual income loss. That's $30 million of disposable income taken out of our economy. And that's the equivalent of 3,000 private sector jobs just up and leaving. Well, when you multiply that around the state, I mean, the reality is, if Act 10 hadn't happened, we'd probably be closer to the 250,000 job goal, because our employment levels, with those kind of dollars being spent throughout the economy, it's hindered our, disposable income in areas of the state like this and like Madison and other areas. And so the reality is, for all the rhetoric focused on jobs, the policies haven't been nearly as urgent, and they haven't been grounded in reality. Look, tax cuts can be effective if you put the money in the hands of people who will spend it. Well, most of our tax cuts have gone to people that already have a lot of money. And in fact, we've cut the benefit of the Earned Income Tax Credit and in the Homestead Credit, low-income programs that stimulate consumer spending among low-income individuals. And so our tax policy, for all the rhetoric, hasn't been reflective of anybody who's serious about stimulating the economy. And so, my hope is that we get some accountability. It may, I'm not going to, look, our economy is stalled. It's way behind the rest of the Midwest. It's happened on the governor's watch, and I'm not even saying it's all his fault. But it would be nice to see him have some rhetoric that matches our reality and has some urgency on some of the, initiatives that actually would make a difference. You're not running for president, you're governing the state of Wisconsin, and we need to get back to these issues.
Well, and it would be nice if he'd have some ownership of the problems that he has caused, the havoc that he has created with some of his policies. One thing that someone brought up to me the other day, and I didn't see anything on this, but I wanted to ask you about it. I was told that one other thing that Walker has done is, while he has shortened the voting time, like in the evenings, and I think that there was one other time too, while at the same time extending by 7 weeks the amount of time that lobbyists can be doing their job. Is that accurate? And did I explain that correctly?
Yeah, although it's a little complicated, we had some horrible decisions aimed at restricting, voter turnout and access to the ballot. The trend in recent years has been, when more people vote, Democrats have done better. President Obama, Tammy Baldwin won the state. In midterm elections, like when the governor was elected, when turnout is low, they tend to do better. There was an effort to restrict early voting, which has been increasingly popular. It's helped clerks out by, having fewer lines at the polls. Sure. And in areas like Milwaukee and Madison, Milwaukee County's got 1 million people. That's a lot of people to accommodate. Better to try to accommodate them. The Republicans' argument in this case was they were confusing uniformity with equality. And if you have a county in the state with 15,000 people, and you say, well, they don't have the money to keep their hours open the same as Milwaukee County, well, yeah, because they only have 15,000 people. You know, and so there was this effort to restrict a lot of the efforts that benefit places that have a high number of voters, and in this case, it's Democratic constituencies. And at the same time they passed that, they passed a bill that allowed lobbyists to give money to candidates earlier. However, a lot of that's because primaries have moved up and ballot circulation has moved up, but it certainly didn't look very good, and it's easy to see why decisions like that make people increasingly cynical.
Well, yeah. It's going to be very interesting come election time to see how he, and I'm sure he'll spin it just fine, but it will be interesting to see how he projects his reasons, you know, for doing some of the things that he's done,
yeah,
and the outcomes that those decisions have had.
Well, you know, we've spent time talking about, you know, getting rid of early voting or some of the reproductive health things. I mean, the amount of time and effort spent on these things that really distract from, you know, we didn't have the urgency on jobs in the economy that we've had on, you know, early voting or transvaginal ultrasounds, and I think that's very telling. You know, we have a lot of bills that are either signed into law for pure partisan advantage, you know, whether it's redistricting or restricting early voting, or to try to meet some ideological purity goal, and it's not going to benefit anybody I know.
Yeah. We're almost out of time here, but I wanted to just, in our couple remaining minutes here, ask you, it's my understanding that you're going to have an opponent in the fall?
Yeah.
At least one?
At least one. Yeah. I don't know much about him. I haven't run into him in my involvement in the community, so I don't have much to say on it. But, yeah, look, I'm looking forward to getting out there and making my case about you know, what I think we need in Madison, and the job that I've done so far, and I feel pretty good about that. It's been all my terms have been very different, and we've had record turnover. I came in 8 years ago, and I was the 99th member out of 99, and I think at the beginning of January there will be, you know, 80 people. I mean, I'll be in the top 10 or 12. And some of it's just because people have gotten tired of it. Some of it's the natural cycle. Some of it's big election swings. But, you know, I'm still motivated to try to make a difference. Yeah. And, I think we need that stability in the body. And, you know, whatever governor, whatever majority, you got to find a way to make a difference.
Sure. Well, and we'll be having you back, you know, when it gets closer to election time to talk about specifically your campaign and that kind of thing.
Well, I look forward to that.
So, good. Any parting thoughts before we wrap things up?
No, just now's the time to, you know, get engaged, get involved, and people can always contact me even during the campaign if they have questions or need help with anything. Okay. And I think they've been putting your contact information and website up during the show. So, all right. Well, as always, thanks so much for being here. Thanks for having me. I look forward to coming back. It's a fast hour. It is. It just kind of zips right by, doesn't it? Always. All right. Well, that's going to do it for us. We'll see you next time. Until then, take care. Keep your eye on us. We've got our eye on Oshkosh. Clear?